Hey, Rylan here at the Vic Shop. On today's video, I'd like to talk to you about the Victory's output shaft and drive sprocket. This video is going to apply to any Victory owner, any model, any year. They all have an output sprocket, output shaft, and a drive sprocket. So in today's video, I just want to explain what the drive sprocket and output shaft are, what they do, how to include them on your routine maintenance, and then what to do if you think it's bad or it has gone bad. So let's take a look at what it is first. Okay, what is the output shaft and why should I be concerned about it? The output shaft is part of the transmission and drivetrain. So I got an engine block here all stripped down. The crankshaft and cylinders are off of it. But you can see it's still got the pulley on the back, and this is what the transmission is in here. And then this it's got the power out, and it drives the belt that gets you down the road. So this pulley comes off, and you can see the shaft sticks out of the engine like so. There's a seal there and an O-ring behind it, and this spacer. It's got these really fine splines here that kind of connect it all, and then there's a retaining nut, to keep it all tied down. And so this is the outside, what you'll see on the outside, and then this is on the inside. This is transmission shaft, the output shaft, and there's a big bearing here that sits inside of the block. And this whole shaft that has all these gears on it is one big piece. And then you can see the splined end that the pulley goes on. And so in the early years, they had a really coarse spline on this and really coarse threads. And like starting in 99, 2000, 2001, and they were quite prone to loosening up and then stripping out. So this shaft here is really hardened steel, really hard and durable, less so than, this is also a really hard piece of steel, but it's cast, not as slightly softer metal than this. The theory being that this is sacrificial if they were ever to loosen up. And so on the old models, they loosened up a lot of time, and we'd have a lot of issue with replacing it. And then in later models, they went to a more fine spline and a more fine thread, which you can see here. So here's, well, this is an older style. Let me get close here. This one has kind of a, whoop, let's get focus there. This one's got more of a triangular spline, and it's pretty coarse. Whereas in later models, they went to this more of a finer squared edge spline, and that one's in good shape. That's the way it's supposed to look. And then as far as the nut that retains it, this one was pretty thin and coarse. They this first one I showed you, they'd use that in 99 to 01, and then, or excuse me, to 02, and then in 03 it's the same width, but it's got more fine threads on it. And so they thought they had kind of improved that there, but it's still, we would see from 03 to 07 models, it can still loosen up. And so then they made another change where they made the nut even bigger. So 08 and later, later stuff is going to have this thicker nut on there with the same kind of thread on that. And so that's the output shaft. Let me get focused here. The output shaft and what it does, and that, it's going to be on every Victory model is going to have this. Okay, so now that I've explained, what the output shaft and the sprocket is and does, I wanted to talk about how to include it in your maintenance schedule. The early bikes, it says to take the pulley off and inspect the threads and everything every 15,000 miles, 1.5. And that's just way too often, I find. I would say if you had a 99 to 02, I would probably do about every 25 to 30,000, because those had the coarse threads and the coarse splines, and they'll loosen up quicker. If you have an 03 or later, you know, 03 through 07, I would say, well, actually, I'd say everything later than that, with these finer splines and the finer thread on the nut, I'd go 50,000 between taking it off and looking at it. And I'd say that's probably pretty safe. You know, it's unfortunate because I've had a bunch come in recently where they were damaged and it could have been caught earlier. And so then I started including them in my high mileage kind of lookovers. And as soon as I start including it, I don't ever find any problems. They all look good, even bikes with 60, 70, 80, 90,000 on them. And then once in a while, a bike will come in with, you know, 50,000 on it, and the whole thing will be all stripped out and screwed up. So it's like, you know, Murphy's Law, I guess. If you check it, it's all good. If you don't check it, it goes bad. You know, that's typical, right? So if you get to 50,000 on any, you know, of your bikes, and you want to check this out, you think that's a good, you know, 50,000 mile service thing I want to check out, the way to go about it would be to remove the exhaust. First of all, it's a pain in the butt. If you got a touring bike like a cross country or a Vision, it's a pain in the butt, especially after 50,000 miles of running, to get the whole exhaust system off there. And then you can get the cover off of the drive sprocket. And underneath, you'll find that, which the nut has always been 1 7/8. And I've pre-loosened this one, but if it's good, that nut is going to be on there. It's 180 foot-pounds, and a lot of times I'll use like my plumber's torch. And knowing that there's a seal and O-ring back there, not to go hog wild with the heat, I'll oftentimes heat up the pulley nut there just to kind of weaken the red Loctite that's on those, because the Loctite on those is pretty substantial. And then once that's warm, not, you know, hugely hot, not glowing red hot, so it's melting stuff behind it, then I'll get out my big impact. I pity you if you're trying to do this by hand with a big bar. I just don't foresee it happening. I just have always used an impact and put it in neutral and try to find a good space in the transmission where it's not up against the gear. Just kind of hold it in place like this. I've pre-loosened this one, you know, just in advance for ease of video. And so it just snapping right off of there. Of course, if this was in good shape and the Loctite was still really tight, you could be rattling on that for a bit, even with a big gun like this. So once you finally get the nut off, loosen the belt a little bit, and then we'll just take the belt off here. And then you do actually want to remove it. So a lot of guys will get to the point where they got the cover off, and you know everything. Oh, I'm sorry, it has a lock plate on there, and you know everything looks fine. And the wrong thing to do would be go, well, everything looks fine, and just button it back up. You actually have to take the nut off, take the retaining plate off, take the nut off, take the pulley off, and check out the splines, both on the pulley and the shaft. And that brings me around to like the number 3 thing to how to see if this is bad or not. So if everything was good, what I would do, you know, if I looked at the shaft and the pulley and everything looked fine, I'd clean it up really well with a wire brush. I'd make sure none of these seals were leaking. If I had a leaky seal, replace that. Clean up the shaft and the threads, and then I'd clean up the pulley as well. And I would do just little tiny bits of red Loctite on the shaft itself, just tiny bit. And then I'd go ahead and just buy a new nut. The nut from the factory has got a really high quality Loctite on it, and then torque it down to the specified 180 foot-pounds. I mean, you could technically reuse the nut and use red Loctite, clean it up real nice if you're kind of in a pinch or whatever. And but you know, it's cheap insurance. And so that would be at 50,000. You're just checking it out. If it all looks good, you just button it back up as per the manual. But if you, back to the third point, if you get it apart and it's like this one where this pulley is super sloppy, I mean, it's totally ruined the shaft and the pulley. So in certain instances, this pulley will loosen up and it starts to ruin the pulley, but the shaft is still savable. And so you may have an instance where you got a transmission noise and you're like, what is that clanging noise? And you know, everyone on the internet's telling you it's this, that, and the other thing. And you know, I'm going to tell you to go in and look at a bunch of things, and one of them will be the output shaft, and you'll have to actually get the huge freaking socket and the pneumatic or wrench and you know, take the whole thing apart to answer that question. Is that transmission, before you get into the transmission, is that noise maybe just a loose sprocket? I've seen it where the sprocket will strip completely out, and a guy will say, oh, my clutch has gone bad, or it goes into first, and you know, I can hear stuff spinning, but it ain't moving. And in that case, it's gotten so bad that it's totally stripped this out. And then most of the time, it's also ruined the shaft, which is the hugest issue you could possibly have. If it didn't get checked and you just kept riding with that noise until one day it just quit moving. And I go, yeah, man, you ruined your output shaft. I'd have to take the engine out, strip it all the way down, get to the last nut and bolt to get this out. It would be several $1,000s worth of labor, plus, you know, $1,000 or $1,500 or more dollars worth of parts. It would be a, you know, $4,000 repair. So even though it doesn't even list this as a service item in the newer bikes, I've seen it be a problem, and it's, if you don't mind, not a bad idea to check it and retorque it and re-Loctite it every 50,000 or so. My hope is it'll just be a waste of a Saturday afternoon for you, and you'll take it all apart and it'll be fine, and you put it all back together again and you can sleep well at night. Or, you know, we may uncover some guys that are having transmission noise, or you know, just weirdness with their belt or whatever. We may have a solution there, a thing to look at that you haven't heard before. So yeah, I guess in summary, that output shaft is really important, and even though it may not list it as a service item in the book, I've seen some issues with it stripping out, and it's probably not a bad idea every, you know, if you got an older bike, every 25, 30,000 to retorque that, pull the pulley off and retorque it, or 50,000 for a later model bike. It's good, cheap insurance. It's just labor and maybe the new nut, and that may save you from a very expensive output shaft replacement someday. So anyway, good luck.